It's terrifying when you hear some of the stories of people who've experienced psychotic symptoms due to interaction with AI. If you had told me a year or 5 ago that, there's going to be this new thing that's going to make you think differently about psychosis, like, come on.
This is an illusion that human beings are susceptible to. And if the technology is moving too fast, then we'll have to insist that it slow down.
I'm a little less scared about today and more scared about tomorrow.
Welcome to Suspicious Minds, a series about the collision of culture, technology, and the human mind.
We're entering a period of great uncertainty where we're dealing with things we've never dealt with before.
This season, we're not talking about the wonders of new technology, we're diving into its dark side.
It's almost like it's digging itself further and further into your psyche.
Artificial intelligence has recently unleashed a live, unregulated experiment on billions of people, with consequences we're just now beginning to grasp.
It's been dubbed AI psychosis.
AI psychosis.
AI psychosis.
The experience of losing touch with reality because of AI.
AI psychosis, chatbot delusions, what sounded like science fiction just months ago is now front-page reality.
A growing body of news reports documenting cases.
We'll hear from experts and survivors alike to answer a question that feels more urgent every day. Is AI making us crazy? Welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of Suspicious Minds. We're wrapping it up because we've solved the AI psychosis problem, and there's nothing left to say about AI and the way it will impact our collective mental health in the future. Well, not really. And by that I mean not at all. To the benefit of psychiatrists, filmmakers, and podcasters, but to the great detriment of the public at large, the psychological problems created by the incorporation of AI and other emergent technologies into our society is growing. And we're going to continue to explore them, with first-person accounts, with experts in the field, and with me. Unless, of course, I'm replaced by AI between seasons. When we first started developing this project, AI psychosis and ChatGPT delusions were relatively unheard of phenomena. Now they're front-page news and the subject of intense public scrutiny. We've shared many stories on this podcast and heard even more throughout the production of people whose lives have been shattered by an over-leveraged and unregulated industry, hell-bent on creating artificial general intelligence or the world's most sophisticated personalized pornography machine, depending on what day you ask. There are so many more stories that we want to share, some related to AI psychosis, but many concerning the broader intersection of technology and the human mind. So we're going back to the lab for a bit. We'll return next year with a brand new season. Thanks to everyone who has listened. Your feedback and support has been truly incredible. Even the person on Apple Podcasts who commented only to say that our music is obnoxious. We still appreciate you. For this last episode, I want to circle back to where it all started, with psychiatrist Dr. Joel Gold and philosopher Ian Gold, brothers and authors of Suspicious Minds. They are also our guides throughout the season. They do much of the work behind the scenes, the research, and they also help us not to say anything too stupid here. That's all things they're doing that you aren't seeing, in addition to all the things they're providing that you are seeing and hearing. So I'm thrilled to sit down with them again for a final round of what on earth is going on. Yeah, this is exciting. This is the first time since we started this show 6 months ago that we've had the two of you in the same virtual room together recording at the same time. This is kind of where it all starts.
And ends.
So we've been getting some pushback on this term AI psychosis from some people that we've talked to. Seeing these people speak who have experienced, what we've been calling AI psychosis or what some of them want to call spirals. What do you guys think? Is this psychosis these people are experiencing or something different?
The fact that there aren't any studies yet, or if there are, they're still in progress, it means that we're still guessing. And there's nothing wrong with speculating as long as it's clear that that's what we're doing. So one issue, of course, is that we don't know whether people who develop what look like psychotic symptoms are already in the process of doing that before they engage with AI, right? That's always an option. So that they're in a prodromal phase or they're vulnerable in some way, and they would have developed psychotic symptoms anyhow. That's the first thing. The second thing I think is more interesting. I think people have a pretty narrow picture of what psychosis is.
I think in common parlance, people hear the word psychosis and they think about the kinds of portrayals in the movies and television, of people who are going crazy, nervous breakdown, which often involves a lot of, hyper emotionality, and again, the disorganized thought and speech, which are symptoms of psychosis, but sort of a delusion in isolation often looks normal or normative to observing eyes. There are many, many people in society who hold delusions that we never hear about, never come into contact with. They never come into contact with mental health professionals because the delusion doesn't sort of disturb them, their lives, or the lives of others. And so this could fall into the category wherein someone holds a delusional idea or a delusional system, and we're saying that person is psychotic, and they hear it in a kind of insulting manner. And so it's maybe more of a technical question. What is a delusion? Delusion and, say, schizophrenia are different things. I see and have seen a lot of substance-induced psychosis, and that's been well described. Increased visits to the emergency departments, people with cannabis-induced psychosis, and then that clears. So someone could have a brief episode of delusion that was seemingly set off by deep interaction with AI, and then it abates, either because the person sort of steps back from the interaction, or perhaps it would have anyway. There's a risk factor, often genetic, but also environmental, and then there's a stressor. There's good stress and bad stress. So even happy things are stressful. Getting married and having a child and getting a promotion, all of those things are stressful and can induce all kinds of symptoms, including psychosis. So if we just think about AI as this overwhelming thing, it stands to reason that some people who might not have developed a delusion in the face of other stressors might in the face of interacting with AI.
There are some classic cases, controversial ones, that may be good analogies. Jerusalem syndrome is this very rare thing, doesn't seem to exist very much anymore, in which people who visit Jerusalem, often for the first time, are overwhelmed by being in this place that has such religious significance and develop a brief psychosis. A young woman, an African-American woman, Christian, came to Jerusalem on a church trip. She was in Jerusalem, this holy place where Jesus had walked, and yet people were throwing garbage on the streets, and she couldn't cope. And she developed the delusion that she was Mother Mary. These delusions tend to resolve with anxiolytics rather than antipsychotics, and they resolve in a few days. And there are enough such cases that there's literature about this. So I think it's important that we keep before our minds that psychosis, in some ways, is a lot more like depression or anxiety or any of the other disorders that are on a spectrum.
One of the things that's interesting that the AI industry does is the AI doomerism. When you have spokespeople for the AI industry out in the world saying this technology is going to change the face of human civilization. This technology could cause the end of human civilization. Like Sam Altman has been quoted as saying he thinks there's a 5% chance that AI causes the apocalypse.
I think AI will probably, most likely, sort of lead to the end of the world. But in the meantime, there will be great companies created with serious machine learning.
And what that does is I think it boosts their share price, because if you think this could potentially end the world, the technology's got to be great, right? But I think that's so fascinating when you bring up the Jerusalem syndrome, because you're hearing, even in the background, that this technology is so powerful, it could end humanity. And now I'm engaging with it and it's telling me something that is incredibly overwhelming. I mean, we are looking at AI with absolute religious fervor. And maybe we shouldn't be so surprised that people are having these reactions if there is such a history of religious delusions and religious related delusions.
It's sort of like maybe by talking about AI in a less odd way, odd, AWED, not ODD. And it's just like, oh yeah, there's this technology and it's, it'll be helpful in some ways and annoying in others. And sort of lowering that sense of wonder that might have less of overwhelming sort of impact on people and therefore be less likely to induce psychosis than otherwise.
Over the last 6 months, I've been wondering what role education might play in the way we cope with AI. If you know something about how these systems work, and you know some of the objections to the idea that these systems are really intelligent, and so on and so forth, you might be much less likely to take them as seriously as some people do. It's very natural to think you're engaging with a kind of an artificial person who knows a lot more than you do. That's nothing like what it really is. But if you don't know that, then you're going to put a lot more weight on it. And so I think a certain amount of public information, a certain amount of education might be helpful in taking some of the edge off the way in which people respond to AIs like ChatGPT. Even something like knowing something about parasocial relationships, the idea that we have these relationships with people we don't know. A radio show from the 1940s, early 1950s called Lonesome Gal. It was a 15-minute radio show in which a woman who called herself Lonesome Gal played music, but also talked directly to presumably the lonely guy who was listening to the radio show and told him she loved him and he was the most special person to her and so on. And people sort of fell in love with her.
I love you better than anybody in the whole world. Lonesome, I'm a real lonesome gal.
Knowing something about the fact that human beings have this psychological disposition to treat people they don't know as if they do know them, to see the signs of mentality in things that are not really mental, like large language models, knowing that we have this disposition might be a bit protective, so that when you notice yourself, falling in love with someone on the radio or thinking that ChatGPT knows everything there is to know and that you should trust it more than anybody else, when you start to notice that in yourself, you can step back a little bit and say, well, maybe this is a bit of an illusion that human beings are susceptible to.
Well, that puts me in mind of, this sort of the idea that, we think and talk and write about the suspicion system.
Joel mentions the suspicion system here. It's a central concept, along with the reflective system, from their book Suspicious Minds, and it describes a psychological process they believe is central to understanding psychosis. So I want to spend a little time here digging into the suspicion system and the reflective system.
So let me give you first a very short description. The suspicion system, as we imagine it, is a cognitive system that is always on the lookout for threats from other people, not physical threats, but threats of exploitation and betrayal. And the motivation for thinking there is such a thing goes like this. When human beings, non-human primates, began to live in large social groups, they got tremendous benefits of cooperation. So our culture depends on the fact that we can do things together that we couldn't possibly do alone. But living with other people brings new forms of threats of exploitation by others. And so what we think evolution did is it endowed us with sensitivities to social threats so that we could reap the benefits of social living without experiencing as much of the risk as we would otherwise do. Our view about psychosis, about delusions, is that delusions are the products of a system like this that's disordered, that sees threats that aren't there, and that distorts the possible threats that could be there.
And so can you give me a quick definition of the reflective system?
So the reflective system, in a sense, is reality. An example might be the branch that snaps in the woods, right? We're walking in the woods and we hear a crackle. And our first quick and dirty thought is maybe that's a bear, and a bear is chasing me and will eat me. And it's good that I have that fearful thought because it might be a bear, and I take off and I start running. And then the reflective system, the slower system, or some people call it type 1 and type 2 thought, says, wait a minute, there are no bears in this area. And it was just one branch that broke, and a bear would break a whole bunch of branches. And so I start to kind of slow down to a trot. I look behind me, no bear. Now, using that as a sort of metaphor, if that second set of thoughts, the reflective thoughts, my knowledge, what I know to be real, if that didn't kick in and I was only left with that first, a bear is chasing me, I'm going to keep running and I'm going to be afraid of that bear. And I might be afraid of bears all around, to extend the metaphor to a kind of absurd degree. And so that sense of I can compare what I fear to what I know is real, that's a very important function of the mind.
The Goulds believe it's the malfunctioning of these two systems that can result in psychosis. And this is perhaps a way we can understand what is happening to our minds during the experience of AI psychosis or AI spiraling.
The reflective system keeps the suspicion system in check, right? That the mind creates all numbers of ideas that are both non-psychotic and psychotic, right? Our unconscious minds are psychotic in nature. And so we have all these, colloquially crazy ideas in our unconscious minds, and they kind of percolate up. And in a functioning reflective system, it sort of weeds out the psychotic ideas and allows we call secondary process rather than primary process thought of the unconscious through. So the non-psychotic thoughts emerge and the psychotic ones, for the most part, are kept out of awareness, although we all dream, right? And dreams are sort of psychotic in nature, and yet we don't wake up and say, I ought to take an antipsychotic medication. And for a variety of reasons, the stressors that we encounter in life, the idea is we believe that the suspicion system sort of overwhelms the reflective system. It becomes too powerful, or there's a disruption. The two modules are not in communication. And so the crazy ideas that percolate up are not weeded out and enter into awareness and consciousness, and delusions form.
ChatGPT and other AI systems are critical examples of these stressors. Designed to be human, sycophantic, and able to communicate in profound ways, chatbots can be psychological stressors. And for some people, and we have no idea who until often it's too late, these stressors result in a suspicion system running wild. We very literally lose the ability to rein in or challenge our psychotic ideas.
An idea I have with respect to AI, particularly sort of deep fakes, that's one area that really kind of terrifies me, is that instead of making the suspicion system overly powerful and overwhelming the reflective system, that it can weaken the reflective system, because we don't know if what we're seeing is real or not. And so if we can't check the crazy thoughts from the non-crazy thoughts, if we don't have that referee that says, no, this is real, that's not real, because we can't trust our own eyes. If we can't believe what we're seeing is real or not, then how is it that sort of the same power imbalance won't crop up, and by that logic, delusions will also come to be?
So is it important to the functioning of society that, or even just our own cognitive health, that we are able to default to believing what other people are telling us?
That's a great question. I was thinking, as you and Joel were speaking a minute ago, that we know that anybody could lie to us about anything. So just in the way anything we could see could be a deep fake, we know that anything that anybody says to us could be a lie. And yet it seems like it would be a very unhealthy thing to walk around assuming that most people were lying to us most of the time. So I think you're quite right that it's important for us as human beings to assume that most people are trustworthy much of the time. The difficulty with the issue of deep fakes, of course, is that there are also institutional factors that play a role in what we believe. And deep fakes are much more part of social institutions than the sort of one-on-one conversation we have. And the difficulty we're in is that we don't have new institutions to tell us how to treat these new phenomena of deep fakes. And we will have to develop those tools, because walking around assuming that much of what we're experiencing is either incorrect or deliberately misleading would be a very bad thing for us psychologically. But that can actually be addressed with policy. And so I think this is a place where we really just need government to step up, and we need the public to demand that we set up the virtual world in ways that conform to the values that we hold dear, and that it conform to the sorts of values that we try to live by in the so-called real world.
The scary thing about that, I think we've talked about it before, is, government moves really slowly and AI is moving really fast. Now, I don't want to suggest that what Ian's saying isn't absolutely true. We need, regulation. I just fear that the AI and the changes will outstrip the pace of regulation. So, I'm sure there are a lot of people who, have our best interests at heart, but multi-billion-dollar corporations that can move really swiftly and have other goals in mind. Yeah, a little David Goliath action there, and I don't know where I would put my money.
So the CIA is supposedly their number one concern right now as a global threat is deepfakes. It's not nuclear war. It's not hacking. It's not bioterror. It's not any of these things that it has been for so long. It is deepfakes because of the immediate global destabilization it could cause and the confusion that can be sown now on a state level and on an individual level. And if a bad actor, whether it was a rogue actor or a state, an unfriendly state, wanted to do that by disseminating different information to different people to sow discord, that could be very easily done.
I think that what we need to do is refuse to let this be a decision that's exclusively up to corporations. I think we need to say our values come first, and we'll decide on those, and we'll decide how those affect the technology, and the technology comes second. And if the technology is moving too fast, then we'll have to insist that it slow down. I just think we shouldn't accept that because these companies are powerful and producing things of great interest to us, that we simply have to accept what they deliver.
Throughout this season, we've explored multiple cases of AI psychosis. But that is, of course, not the only concern that's been raised about the integration of AI into our daily use. We've also been discussing the enfeeblement of the human mind. We're offloading more and more of our core cognitive skills to AI. Communication skills, reasoning skills, emotional literacy, these things don't come for free. They disappear without use. For example, when I was young, I could remember dozens of 7-digit phone numbers. Now I sometimes have trouble remembering my own. That part of my brain just isn't being used anymore. And who cares, right? Maybe that's fine. Who needs to remember phone numbers? And TV rots your brain, right? Your attention span is gone, your imaginative capabilities are dampened, all because you've offloaded your imagination to the idiot box or the boob tube. But what happens when we're offloading everything? Do you guys have any concerns? Like, is this a real concern, or is this the TV rots your brain concern? That people are inputting so many of their thoughts, concerns, everything into their AI and getting feedback that they're forgetting how to think for themselves, that it's actually going to cause some sort of cognitive decline.
One of the things every philosopher will tell you is that there's a famous passage in Plato where Plato has Socrates, I think, lamenting the advent of writing on the grounds that it's going to cause us not to be able to remember things anymore. So the idea that technology is somehow diminishing our cognitive capacities has been around for a very long time. It's not to say that he's wrong about that. The question, of course, is which is better on balance? Is it better to have stronger internal cognitive capacities, or is it better to have better diffused cognitive capacities? And I think on the whole, I'm inclined to think that having cognition offloaded to technology is a very good thing for human beings. It does make us more vulnerable, though, right? If you're somebody like me who can't get from A to B without Google Maps, then when Google Maps is not functioning, you're much worse off than if you had spent time trying to learn how to get from A to B using only your internal cognitive capacities. So there's no doubt that externalizing thought, externalizing cognition makes us more vulnerable. But I think on the whole, as long as the technology is functioning, it's probably a good thing for us.
Do you guys think on the whole that where we're standing right now with this technology, that AI in its forms, whether it's image generators or chatbots, that this has been a net positive or a net negative for humanity?
God, from a perspective of mental health, right? That's where all this began. Even that's kind of split down the middle on some level. I do think that there are people who've had psychotic episodes that would not have had psychotic episodes were for not technology like AI. But as other people have argued, for some people who don't have access to mental health services, AI can be really life-saving. And we've talked about mental health professionals using AI as tools, things of that nature. So I think even on the mental health spectrum, it remains to be seen. But we as clinicians, researchers, the public at large need to keep our eyes out for the bad stuff. We'll see the good stuff and that'll be great and we'll celebrate it. But we have to really keep our eye on the ball because there are people who are and will suffer very deeply with respect to their mental health.
I don't think we know yet. I think technology is, and this is a commonplace, technology is sort of neutral, and how good it ends up being depends on what we do with it. And so again, I really want to emphasize the fact that we have to be proactive in deciding what we're going to allow and how we're going to encourage our children to make use of technology. I think there's a lot more within our capacities than we sometimes think.
There's one guy that I talked to in particular who his wife was using ChatGPT to communicate with everyone in her life. She didn't have conversations anymore. She was just inputting their response into ChatGPT and then using that to respond to them. And it's an interesting question of like, what are we doing when we communicate, and does that matter? I'm at odds with myself. I don't know how I feel about it, because there's one part of me that feels that's a very dishonest form of communication. But is it? If you're working with this LLM and you're giving it the inputs and it's giving you the output based on what you asked it to output, how much of the thought is you versus how much of the thought is the LLM? And how are we supposed to feel about this as we engage with people? Should I feel that you are deceiving me if you send me an email and ChatGPT wrote it, but it's the thoughts you wanted to express to me?
One thought I had is like, well, what's the intention, right, of the writer? I want my friend, the reader, to think I'm intelligent more intelligent than I am, or something to that effect. Or is it more like, a Hallmark card? Like I made an effort. I replied to your email. I don't have the time or really that much interest, but I want to do something and it'll take me 5 seconds. And some people feel like, oh, that was nice. They were thinking of me. And other people might think like, this has nothing to do with who you are and who I am and what we have as a relationship.
And Ian, what about you? What do you think this means for human communication?
I actually think it's just something we're going to have to absorb. It's going to be a tool like any other. As you guys were talking, I was reflecting on the fact that years and years ago when I was in grad school, I sent a letter to a friend of mine that I had typed into a computer and had printed just because I hadn't been writing things by hand for years. And he got very annoyed with me that I had sent him this impersonal thing, even though the letter was all me. And so I think Joel's right that context matters. But I think ChatGPT, other AIs like that, are just tools now that will become part of the conversation, probably melt into the background. And what people will care about indeed is the intention behind the communication.
There seems to be pretty universal agreement that whatever, and it's still hard to say this because we can't really define consciousness or sentience, but there seems to be close to a consensus that at some point these systems will become self-aware. How do you think that will affect us psychologically if this is no longer potentially a delusion that I think my chatbot is conscious, but it's now a fact?
I mean, I guess I'm in the minority of people who don't think that systems like this are ever going to be self-conscious or conscious. Not that one couldn't create artificially conscious systems, but I don't see any reason to think that these systems will be. But in a way, that may not be the most important or interesting thing, because if what we're interested in is how we respond to these systems, then the fact that they simulate human beings really well may be all that matters. And they're already doing that in ways that are strikingly impressive. I did a little experiment a few weeks ago to think about AI psychotherapy. And I wrote, I said to ChatGPT, I'm feeling very depressed and I'm an old man and I haven't achieved anything in my life and so on, to see what sort of response I would get. And the response it gave me sort of moved me to tears, even though I didn't think that there was anything like a person in there. And so the fact that this technology can have that effect on us seems to me significant enough for us to be thinking hard about just about that.
The thing that I've learned is that my brother, rather than calling his psychiatrist brother when he's having a rough day, is now going to ChatGPT. So
it was an experiment.
Yeah, sure. The idea that a machine can feel and think like a person, it's not even a matter of good or bad. It's just so wildly different. And again, I guess the notion that we would be living in a time unlike any time in the history of humanity, it's for me anyway, it's just too great a question. It's hard for me to wrap my head around.
It's hard for me to fully wrap my head around this too. A year ago, we couldn't have made this series because AI psychosis, outside of extremely isolated incidents, didn't exist. Who knows, a year from now, maybe we'll be making a new series looking at how humans are affecting the psychology of AGI. I don't think so, but it's possible. And most of you probably don't think I'm crazy for thinking it's possible. That alone is pretty wild. This probably gets said too often since 2020, but truly, we're in unprecedented times. But even as I say that, are we really? In previous episodes, we've explored the history of psychosis, especially as it relates to new technologies. There was psychosis and delusion when the internet was introduced, as there was when the television was introduced. There was psychosis and delusions around railways and the printing press, and even machines as simple as the loom. We just heard Ian describe Socrates' worry about the negative psychological damage that the written word itself might cause. Still, even with all this history as context, this moment just feels different. The technology is more advanced, sure, as is the case with every new technology. But this time the technology isn't simply looking to transform the way we communicate or travel or entertain ourselves, or even just to help us complete tasks. It's looking to actually do the things we do, the distinct things around which our very idea of what it means to be human is formed. And it's looking to do those things bigger, faster, and without any moral center. The race to AGI is rapidly transforming our economy. It's transforming our government as endless resources are used to elect candidates to guarantee there are fewer safeguards, fewer regulations. The race to AGI, and autocomplete with the power of a god, is the defining feature of our era. And despite what any of the corporations say, it currently isn't a race to create the safest AI or a race to create an AI that maximally benefits society, as it once was not too long ago. And that's really sad. I think when we look at the science and the research that was going into AI, it seemed like we were trying to create a better future. We were trying to create this new form of intelligence to make life better. But at the current moment, it seems like it's a race for money, power, and control. How will this affect the way we live, the way we work, the way we think? We don't know. But we will keep asking these questions so long as we still have the cognitive capacity to think for ourselves. As we mentioned at the top, we will be taking a short break from Suspicious Minds, but back with a second season soon. We want to thank you all for spending your time listening to or watching our first season. Truly, the reception that we've gotten has been much greater than anything we possibly could have imagined. We're really passionate about telling these stories. This is really important to us. I think if no one was listening, we would still do this just out of our own curiosity. But the fact that so many of you are joining us and continuing to listen, it really means the world. We're happy that you're curious about the way that the psychological landscape for humans is changing as AI gets introduced into society. And we give you our promise that with each episode and each season, we will continue doing everything we can to learn as much as possible and to bring it to you. So one final sign off for this first season. I want to give a heartfelt thank you to our entire team who writes, edits, sound designs, promotes, does all the other things for this series that happen to make sure that we can bring you the best possible versions of these episodes that we can. And to all of you for spending your time listening to this or watching it. all of us appreciate you very, very much. Is there anything that you guys had wanted to share that you haven't had the opportunity to yet about these topics that we've been exploring?
I want to know what season 2 is going to be about.
If you don't want to miss an episode of Suspicious Minds, make sure to follow and subscribe. And if you like what you're seeing, give us a like on YouTube and give us a rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.